The man had been drifting in the sea for 3 days and 3 nights because of the plane crash, and when he was almost desperate, he finally saw land and he rushed to the shore with a life raft. Then he went barefoot into a thick jungle to see if there was any sign of humans. But all he could hear was the low roar of the waves. He knew he had to find a way to save himself, so he wrote a distress signal on the beach, praying that a passing airplane would see it. But time passed until the sun went down and the sky turned orange and the sea glowed gold. But there was no sign of the plane. Paul sat alone on the beach, filled with helplessness and despair. What was even more frightening was that at night, when Paul was about to go to bed, there was a strange noise in the jungle that made him panic. Fearing that the next moment there would be a beast of prey, he gripped the oars tightly and spent the rest of the night in great anxiety. Finally, the next day, Paul realized that half of the signal he had written yesterday had been washed away by the sea. So he had to find a higher ground and make a bigger signal with a piece of wood. Just then a few delivery boxes floated on the beach and Paul picked them up, saying that they might be useful in the future. But then suddenly that strange sound from last night came back from the jungle. This time he had the guts to see who was behind it. But he was surprised when a coconut fell from the sky just as he was walking past it. Paul finally realized that the monster that had frightened him all night was just the sound of coconuts falling to the ground. His heart finally let go. In order to quench his thirst, Paul picked up a pile of coconuts, but the hard shell, but he could not do anything about it no matter how much he knocked, not broken, how much he smashed, not broken. But the reason why humans are called the top of the food chain is because they know how to observe and use tools. He used a stone blade to cut through the coconut skin and peeled it back layer by layer, and then cracked it again. But the coconut was open. But there was no juice left inside the shell. Luckily, Paul was not a stick in the mud. So he sharpened the stone and drilled a small hole in the coconut, and finally got a drink of the sweet coconut juice. But the coconut juice alone was not enough for him to survive. To fill his stomach, he decided to go fishing in the sea. Unfortunately, as soon as he stepped out of the sea, his feet were cut by the rocks and he didn't even get any fish scales. But soon he figured out a way to make a pair of shoes by cutting open his pants and stuffing them with leaves. And then he continued to explore the jungle. Until an hour later Paul finally reached the highest point of the island. He carefully looked down and saw few living things, not to mention people. And to make matters worse, there were no other islands as far as he could see. Paul despaired at the thought of being stuck here forever. But before he could grieve, he suddenly realized that something was floating on the surface. The man wiped his skates in pain and then broke his mouth open. Inside there was a wisdom tooth that made his life worse than death if it was not removed in time. Not to mention surviving on a deserted island. Even the most basic food is a problem. So he made a bold decision to use the ice skates against his wisdom teeth, then picked up a rock and aimed at the other end of the ice skates and smashed it down. The next day, the man woke up and went to the courier he had collected. Since it was undeliverable, he might as well open it and see if there was a satellite phone inside. Inside the first delivery were several videotapes from Japan. The second was a divorce decree, and then a volleyball signed by a soccer player. The man couldn't think of any use for it. Luckily, the fourth delivery was a leopard print dress that could be used as a fishing net to catch small fish. Next, he was going to open the last package, but looking at the wings on the package, the man hesitated because it gave him hope that he could go home. However, he would never have guessed that the package contained a satellite phone. After unpacking the package, the man continued to work. He wove a tripod out of wood and put a leaky life valve on it to serve as a roof. Then he flattened the cardboard box and laid it on the ground as a bed. And he had a small home. The man then unraveled his leopard print skirt and made a simple net out of black yarn. But to his embarrassment, the fish he caught were not only pitifully small, but also tasted horribly foul. So he turned to crabs, but he never expected that when he broke off the crab pincers and brought them to his mouth, he found that the meat of the raw crab was flowing out like a big snot, which made it hard for him to swallow. Nothing tastes good without a fire. So he started to imitate the TV show of drilling wood for fire. He tore up a cardboard box and put it on a tree trunk and then frantically rubbed the stick with both hands. But after a day and a night of work, he didn't get any sparks. The man was very frustrated because it looked so simple on TV. But it wasn't the same when he did it himself. He had no choice but to use the coconut meat to satisfy his hunger. But just as he was poking the coconut meat with a stone knife, he suddenly thought of another solution. He scraped some wood shavings from the coconuts, intending to use friction to generate heat to ignite the coconut threads. But due to carelessness, the sharp stick pierced his palm. The man was so devastated that he threw away the wood in his hand and smashed the objects around him to vent his long-suppressed emotions. But after venting, the man still had to face the reality. After all, anger cannot solve the problem. He picked up the log again and wrapped a rag around the top of the stick to try to start a fire. Under the constant friction of the wood, the ignition soon became white smoke, and the man hurriedly squatted down and blew on it. And finally a small fire started. So 4 years passed and the man had become a savage, more and more skillful at fishing, and survival was no longer a problem for him. But the loneliness he experienced day after day gradually broke him down and he even thought of giving up. But when he thought of his wife and children waiting for him at home, he had the motivation to live again. Until this morning a strange sound woke him up. He carefully went out to check and found that it was a piece of old iron. But this useless piece of iron became the man's hope to escape. When the man saw the tin being blown down by the wind, he suddenly thought of a way to escape from the deserted island. He cut down all the trees on the island and then peeled off the bark one by one and put it in the sun to dry until it was all dry, and then the man went back to the cave and started to weave ropes day and night, and then he used the ropes to start assembling the skeleton of the raft. But he never thought that even if he stripped all the bark on the island to make the rope for the boat, it would still not be enough. Just when the man was at a loss, Wilson seemed to remind him where he could find some spare rope. It turns out that a year ago, the man had prepared a rope for himself to give up on the cliff, but now it became his hope of escape. Soon the raft was completed. But strangely, the man did not hurry to leave, but put a small flag beside the raft as if waiting for something. I don't know how long it took, but on this day, a gale blew up on the island and the man instantly realized that he had a chance to get off the island. So he grabbed Wilson and an unopened courier and headed out to sea. But leaving the island was not easy. The waves came in waves and tried to wash the man back, facing the waves, which had defeated him countless times. The man was undaunted and immediately released the ropes tying the sails to the aftermath of the waves. He made it out in one breath. Looking back at the island where he had lived for 4 years, he felt a strange sadness in his heart. For the next few days, the man let the waves drive him far away from the sea when he was thirsty. He used coconut shells to collect rainwater when he was hungry. He would go directly into the sea to catch fish. Without realizing it, he had already drifted in the sea for more than a week. But that night the sky suddenly started to storm, and even worse, the sails on the raft were blown away and the man could only hold on to the raft so that he didn't fall into the sea. When the storm calmed down, the raft was in a state of disrepair. But the whale's wave woke the man up. When he realized that Wilson was missing, he panicked and shouted. Wilson finally saw him not far away. The man jumped out of the boat and tried to retrieve him, but Wilson was getting farther and farther away from him. The man lost his best friend. Grief. He lay in the broken boat, no longer hoped to survive. He threw the oars in his hands into the sea, but there's no such thing as a dead man's life. And just as he's dying, he manages to come upon a slow-moving freighter. When he hears something, the man turns around in a daze and reaches out to the freighter. And at that moment he is finally rescued. After 1,500 days of survival in the wild, the man finally returns to modern civilization. At the end of the movie, the man delivers an unopened courier from 4 years ago to the recipient's home and writes a note of thanks, because the courier gave him hope for survival and was a testament to his new life. But it is said that the courier contained a satellite phone.